Talk Loud and Clear, the podcast by SADA for innovative business leaders and technology enthusiasts, where we explore how Google Cloud is transforming the industry and what that means to you. Now here's your host, Tony Safoian.
One of my favorite things that we do at SADA is our All Hands. We do it every January, and this year it was more special than ever. One of the things that made it really, truly different was that we had several Google executives fly out to do fireside chats. And this particular fireside chat is with me and Google's global channel chief, Carolee Gearhart. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I don't want it to be too much about me, but I think in the context of Kayla and also like how cool it is that I think what we're all doing together. I knew tech was the right industry for me when I think back. So I was like a little girl. I read all the books in the elementary school library. I got through the fiction section at junior high, but I was a voracious reader because there was just so much cool stuff to know. And I remember my first tech job at a reseller and SI. That was a North American family-owned company that had been started that did really, really well. Many of you won't have lived through these days, but once upon a time, you would have racks of material that would describe what someone was selling. And if you were interviewing for a job, you would make sure to pick up that material and read about what they were doing before the interview. And so I remember reading about hubs and routers, no clue what they were. But it was a sales job, and I put myself through college basically selling stuff because it was like flexible hours, and I could sell stuff while still going to school. I literally started, so it's like, look, smiling and dialing. Maybe some of you have been there. It's a great start gig because you really learn the intestinal fortitude of what it takes, and you learn that it is a numbers game, right? You got to show up every day, and you do the work, and doing the work is what nets out the impact. And so I started at from a technology perspective at a reseller, did that. So smiling, dialing to inside sales management, to outside sales, and then running the services business, never having implemented anything. But we were starting that part of a business. That division was bought by AT&T. But then I went on from there. I worked at Deloitte, and then I've worked at sort of vendors, so whether PeopleSoft, SAP. So it has been a very, very long enterprise B2B piece, which is back over. So when Thomas was there, it was like, yes, I get this game. And so anyway, so that was why tech was the right gig for me, is because it was like a library that always had new books. And I think if any of you guys are trying to figure out what's the thing that'll keep you engaged in your career, that'll keep you young, it is learning new stuff. I think that is one of the secrets to life overall, is continually willing to be a beginner. We're in a career where there's always going to be something new. The degree to which you're willing to throw yourself in and jump in on that learning something new will be super impactful. So for me, I wasn't looking for another job when Google came aggressively calling. There were people who knew me over there, and they kind of kept coming. But when I was like, look, there is a ton that resonates for me about Google's mission, which is making the world's information useful and accessible. And so when I think about Google writ large, that was something that called out to who that little girl was. That was all about sort of access to information and how impactful that had been for me. And when I think about Google Cloud, a bunch of it is democratizing data in a way that means someone can be a startup somewhere and not have to invest in the whole infrastructure and really drive out an idea, whether it's AI or ML. There's so much fascinating stuff that is going on. And so it is both the aspect of sort of from an entrepreneurial perspective, what that means, the impact that can have. And then as someone who has worked in large global companies and in global roles, one of the other things that, of course, appealed about Google is the global impact that it can have. And so when you think about enterprise businesses and you think about what their experience has been overall in the market, is they have typically been laggards behind what consumer experience has been right? I had my first exposure to Google, to G Suite, was my son in school, right? And so when you think about someone who, a kid who was in first grade and had a tablet and was sort of off pushing buttons and doing stuff. We were talking earlier, right, about digital natives and what that's like. And so when you think about sort of that experience, but a lot of what it's been like to turn up at work, maybe companies that I've worked for before that I won't mention specifically. You think about like doing expense reports or whatever. It's like the furthest thing from a customer-friendly experience, right? It was like you would not like reuse this application if you were in like your real life, but you're stuck with it because the job set you up with it. And I think that aspect of saying there's so much opportunity to unlock from an enterprise perspective is a big part of why I came to Google, why I'm here. And it's one of the reasons why I'm super excited about you guys. And I know there's a bunch of folks in the audience when I talk to Tony about who's here across all different roles within SADA. And I would just be, there is, whether you are in HR or you're in the back office, all of us are impacting the way our customers experience the world, whether you're picking great people, whether you're making sure their bill is right? Whatever job that you've got, it's like ultimately it is, what is that end customer impact, which is probably a good segue to some of our strategy.
Yeah, customer experience. We talk about that a lot, and I love, as you said, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Is this is not just a sales kickoff. This is literally everybody, and we are all kind of rowing in the same direction. And we're lucky, and I'm lucky that we get to talk all the time. But so many of others at SADA are just sort of on the receiving end of the strategy, and now they get to experience it like we do, and that means a lot. So, your role, as far as I'm concerned, when you came to Google, was net new. Like, we didn't have this kind of channel focus globally, responsibility over programs in this sort of hyper channel focused way. And I say we were in New York together, and when you invited me to that panel, which was an amazing experience, and you have a global role, and you were on forecast calls. I was like, Carolee's on global forecast calls, like in Japan at some odd hour. But that's how actually ingrained you are in your role in what goes on in the field and the sales execution side. So I actually didn't know that. So it's really amazing that you're that hands-on, which also gives you exposure to that strategy because you're helping drive that strategy. So how have you seen that evolve while in the time that you were there, and what do you see in 2020 going forward?
Yeah, well, you referenced Thomas coming on board, and I think, there's many things too around like right place and right time, and I think that's for all of us too in our careers, figuring out like, hey, is what is needed now? Is that what I've got, and is this the right place for me right now? And I think Thomas is like the right place at the right time. You referenced sort of the enterprise element of that and what that has meant. If any of you have not spent more individual time with Thomas, but it is like boom, boom, boom. This is what we're doing. Sort of case closed. It is a super, super clear and focused, and it's very aligned. Some of you, so I had the pleasure of also working for Rob Enslin back when he was at SAP. He's running, global. He's president for Google Cloud now, working for him again, and he also has a super focus, and Greg McEwen is one of his friends. He wrote the book Essentialism. I encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't taken a look at that book. But it is really about saying, right, doing a few things well has a disproportionate impact versus doing lots of things. And so I think the first thing that you really saw from a Thomas perspective was to step back and be like, there are certain named markets that are disproportionately impacted in terms of where we've got to go. Two, there are certain segments that are disproportionately impacted in terms of like where we go. And so super, super focused of saying, and are we making sure, like the hardest thing we've all been there is to say like what, like not to do. And when you are Google today, and what I tell, my poor organization has been around, it's like, there's no shortage of great ideas. In fact, there's like not even shortage of like really brilliant ideas. The art is saying out of all of those, right, which are like the really cream of the crop that will have a disproportionate impact on our business. And it's the same thing all of you are doing every day when you turn up and you say like, which customers, what do I spend my time on out of what I'm doing? Is there certain things that are going to have a disproportionate impact on the outcome? And so I think Thomas has done an amazing job of really focusing organizationally on that. And when I think about what that means for all of you, and you will have seen in the market, and we're just chatting like aside, a huge deal we just announced with Sabre. There are massive deals that Google has been doing. There is massive hiring that has gone on in the whole organization that's continuing to go on. And nonetheless, if you are Google today and you said, what do we need to do to be clear, even with all that hiring, even with all the progress we're making, it is existential for us to do partnering well. So if you were to step back and look at who some of our competitors are and what it means for us in terms of working with you, there is no question from the top on down, if we don't do this right, we will not be able to reach enough of the market fast enough. We are in the Wild West. We're in the, like once upon a time here where they're like, go out, nail down the four corners, whatever four corners, get there first, and that's your territory. That really is the game. And that piece of saying when I started my career and was like smiling and dialing, it is game on for that now. Is people are out talking to customers right now, today, that are making decisions that are going to have impact over an arc of years. And I know Wendy will talk a little bit later about sort of what those customers want to hear, but one of the things that we did go through from a strategy perspective was our sort of, what are you solving for? You're going to see a bunch more branding from Google overall. And that was like a collective, and we saw that and Thomas's staff sort of demoed for us. It was like a collective sigh in the room because it's like, that's right. That's what's about, like, one, the focus is on the customer. What really matters is what's really important to them, which is why all of you and whatever job you're doing are impacting those customers. But it's about what's really important to them. And more important, it's like specifically, what is the thing that they're solving for? And the degree to which any of us, I think Google has amazing products. I think there's a bunch of people who would independently say, we have the best products that are out there. And none of that matters if it doesn't matter to what that customer is trying to do. And so that's really the art that's in front of all of us. That's really what Thomas is focused on. How do you make sure you're both, we've got sort of, we're not broadcasting. We're spending enough time in listening mode to really understand what they're after, what they need, and that our job is really then trying to say, how do we translate connecting everything we can bring to the table to addressing what we've heard to that customer. And certainly when I talk about partnering being existential to Google, it's going to be, how are we making sure we're working together in an orchestrated way? How do we bring the right resources at the right time? How do we make sure we know who they are, that you have access, but also that we're working in a coordinated way that says, it's time memorial, 1 + 1 = 3. But that is really about saying we've got the right resources at the right time. And that starts like job one, that starts with listening. So if we screw up that part, we're never going to know what exactly are the right mix to bring. And so I think that piece is super important. And I think it's making sure that we've got like a focus, which I think Thomas has really brought to. And I know you've seen some of that. Tell me
the focus is interesting. 6 months ago, there was 8 solution pillars, and now there's 6, and then there's 5. I mean, hyper focus. There's 35 countries we care about. Now, actually, it's 28. We're seeing it get more and more narrow. Now it's 21, right? There's only 21 markets that matter. And focus for us is important, and we express that in certain ways. Like we're not going to do SAP. That's a statement. That's for the GSIs. Let them have that. We're not going to expand to Europe or Asia as much as the sales leadership there wants us to. Yeah, we have to do that because we even have more limited resources, much more than Google does. So focus is important. But the Sabre deal, and there's, it's not the first 10-year deal we've seen at Google, but that's a 10-year deal. That means the land grab, quote unquote, we're talking about. These are customers that are making a bet. That's a 10-year bet. I don't remember deliberate 10-year bets on anything else. Cisco was not necessarily a 10-year bet. It was a 3-year bet. Dell, 3 years, their end of life, we're going to replace them. We could buy something else. With regards to high impact, right? A lot of customers want to experiment and do science experiments on the Google platform because they think it's cool, or maybe they're like, I heard Google does AI better, so can you do this little thing that's a lot of work, but maybe doesn't have an outsized business impact and outcome. So for our ability to source business at a really high quality, convert those to initial wins that are PSF or some other proof of concept, but turn that as diligently and deliberately as possible to a multi-year massive commit, that is the name of the game. But there's a lot of work required to get a customer to say that they're going to not only stick with Google Cloud, but with you as a partner for the next 5 years. The level of confidence you have to instill is a much higher bar than when we're all selling, we've been doing this 20 years, routers, switches, servers, etc. right? So if we get really, really good at that, that's going to resonate very, very well with the Google Field organization, with the channel organization. But that's why you see us investing in things like technical account management, customer success, client partner organization. Like when they sign that commit also, like Google has to make hell or high water, Sabre actually consumes what they think they're going to consume and achieve the business outcomes they're going to think they can achieve over the last decade. So it really, in a magical way, aligns incentives in a way that our ecosystem, enterprise software, hasn't seen that level of alignment.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are the ones who are instantiating. Like, I mean, you are the face to the customer. I mean, just to be clear, and it's really important to us. I know we're going to talk a little bit later about culture, but I mean, like the way you referenced earlier, and like the way you guys show up, Kayla was talking about that as well. I mean, you really are a bunch of what the experience is for those customers. And I think when I think about the things that differentiate Google, and why is someone making a 10-year bet? So you reference it's value creation. So it's going to be, look, what can you do that you couldn't otherwise? But also part of what Google will be like, look, we believe there is a war on like the baseline software stack. And I think if you step back and said what Google brings to the table is actually flexibility and choice. If you're an enterprise, what the thing is you don't want to be beholden and locked in. And what we're saying when you see us driving out innovations like Anthos is to say, hey, look, we got you. We got you if you're still staying. There's some, I started on probably something else that none of you guys have seen before, dumb terminals, mainframes are like green screens, right? So it's like there are still applications out there that are not going to move for any time soon. And they're going to say, how do I deal with that? How do I deal with apps that I am sort of getting ready to move? How do I containerize them? What Google is about creating a software stack that creates choice and flexibility that the others are not. And they're actively, by the way, trying to lock them in. So you're like, first I got to think about how do I create value for that customer? How do I make sure you're going to make a 10-year bet because it's the least risky of the bets. You can still hedge your bets. You can still have options to run on other public clouds. And in fact, Google has, I'd be like, it's not about what people are saying. It's like put their money where their mouth is. Google has repeatedly, from Kubernetes to TensorFlow, we've innovated on things that have gone out from an open source perspective. And we've publicly said that actually our strategy is to ensure that customers can support, right, multiple clouds. They can have their on-prem environment. They can have a private cloud environment. They can have multiple public cloud environments. Now, we think we're the best. And in fact, if you start thinking about the other things where we're differentiated around trust, around what we can do from sort of highly differentiated AI and ML, and you're right, let's not get pigeonholed into like some sideshow. This is really about core business decisions that they're making that they're going to live with for a long time, and they're going to want flexibility, et cetera. So we need to do a good job together of bringing that story, and it's why who we partner with is super, super important to us. I remember coming home from my my first 3 days at Google, so they have Noogler training, and I came home and was chatting with my husband about Noogler training. I was like, the thing that I was like, dude, I just spent 3 days in training and no one talked about making any money. And I wasn't sure what to do. I was like, I might not be at the right place. However, a bunch of why that was really related to the culture element. And it was that piece that really matters about that is some of the reason why we win. It's some of the reason we talk about a bunch about it with partners, and we'll talk about a little bit later what I think is really differentiated about that. But I think the piece of sort of, look, you guys are the face of the customers. You're the way we show up. We're going to win together. It's like we got to be really, really smart about making sure we're exploiting and making the customers clear on how we're going to create more optionality for them, more flexibility, the way in which you're going to be able to guide them through that journey that both respects where they are, but helps them create a vision for where they need to be.
Yeah. And look, some of us were in the keynote at Accelerate. I mean, you want to understand how channel-centric it has become. Like, most people don't want to talk to anybody before they go on stage at a keynote. Like, if they're the headliner, Carolee invited me to sit with like 15 global partners right before they went on stage with Rob and TK to talk to us. Because, TK was going to fly out or whatever. That was the only time he was going to
flying out right after that keynote. So, like he wasn't spending any time with our field people. It was with you guys.
The only time he spent it with partners. That you would have never gotten that in previous leadership. And the other really cool thing was they opened with G Suite, which I thought was super exciting because that's also very different. But that was amazing. I didn't even realize that they were going to, he was going to fly out. Rob stayed longer, which is great. We spent more time with him. But partners front and center, I think, is just amazing. And we feel that in every level. It's not just coming from the channel team and we don't see it in the field. Like, no, we see it everywhere. The other point you made, what the keynote reminded me of, like what Urs was talking about was so infinite game oriented, just like what our leadership was talking about yesterday on stage. They're not talking about like, oh, we have to be number 2 in 3 years, otherwise sky's falling. Urs is like 10 years. Like we're thinking 10 years ahead. Anthos is the secret sauce. It is a differentiator. It is why someone would be willing to sign a 10-year deal, because it's not like Saber's giving up all the leverage to Google. No, Google still has to be the best public cloud provider because they can be on Anthos and actually spend most of the consumption on Azure if they wanted to, or leave it on premise on Kubernetes. So I love the authenticity of having to win in an even playing field where the confidence comes off with how Google leads and speaks to the market in such a different way than the competitors, and we just love being on that side of the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And back over to how important here. So we did, and it was actually this was my second sales kickoff. My first year, I was like, I'm gonna get partners there. I was like this close. I got agreement, and then it like unwound. And so I was like, okay, year 2. So I'll be like, be persistent, guys. Right? And so when I think about that was a big move. Our partner organization grew more than 50% year over year. So we've had massive growth in that, and of course with the field piece. And that's probably bears in mind I flew in to get here, so I missed Nirav. He may have touched on this, but I think the other piece is like, look, you guys are going to be running into new Googlers all the time. I'd be like, it's like the good news and the bad news. You have a chance to like start, like they're trying to figure out where's the bathroom. You'd be like, hey, I'm your gal, I'm your guy. But we're going to be getting people who are coming from all different backgrounds. So I would just be, look, I think in the real world, that's going to mean sometimes your experience is going to be uneven. We've done a lot to make sure, unlike other providers, that they're totally like comp neutral. In some cases, actually, it's even better for them to work with partners than it is to do a deal directly. So we've done a lot to create infrastructure that's in place to support them effectively working with you. But I'll be like, with that many new people, we're not always going to get it right. So like, please talk. Speak up, ask questions, ask for help. If something isn't going the way you expect it to, I would just be like, don't write them off. Be like, they're probably, new in the saddle. Help us, help you. The team that Ahmed, is talking about is here to, support you. So I just please speak up too.
On that note, I have to tell you, the last 3 months, something's changed from the standpoint of, and I don't know, it's the work, obviously, it's a culmination of the work you're doing, Kayla's doing, programs, and Ahmed, and everything else, and Nirav. We have new Googlers coming in, and they give us, like, our own sales pitch. Like, what we normally would say, they're like, I just got here, but I know exactly who you are, I know what you do, I know why I should work with you, and, like, partners of the future. We're like, great, I guess we're done here. No, Carolee, seriously, it took years to get there, where I remember in the past, it was like, this is who we are. Like, we're like, how do you not even know who SADA is? Like, we were just on stage the other day, and you're like, who's SADA? Or like, why use partners? Or like, I can't really contract through partners, right? Like, we used to get all this like nonsense. We had to like try to control that narrative in Google's own field, and now the response is so different. So it's a culmination of all that work. So thank you. Our job is way easier. And we'll continue to do that, of course, and to talk and to express and get our pitches down. But it's just, it's definitely, we have tailwinds now.
Well, I'd be like, keep holding us accountable, because we've got like the way this works is like both sides are pulling their weight. And, so I talked about, like, look, these are things that we expect to deliver for you. I think from things that we want from you, I would be like, look, really, really want you guys to know our solutions well enough that you're able to be that translator, right? Because it's really, in the end, like, what is the customer looking for? And you've got to know it well enough. It's like, they have that, like, classic thing of, like, you really know something when you go to try to teach it to someone else. And you realize, oh, wait, hang on a minute. There's, like, a few gaps. I was working on that with some math homework, unfortunately, with my son the other week. Like, I used to know how to do this. No, let me just, like, gonna have to do, like, a little refresher course. And I think there is a piece for us around that element of saying, look, you really know what the solutions do, but they're only impactful the degree to which you're able to translate that to customers. So it's like, that's what we want. That's what we want from you. And we care a lot about the values that you show up with too, because that's part of what Google is about. And so I think you reflecting the way you turn up, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of what the Google, like, values are, but that's really, really important to us. And then it's like, look, work together as an orchestrated team. So I'd be like, keep talking. Like, the whole time, it's like, just keep talking, and right, you've done that translation, what does the customer need? Then that helps you figure out, okay, we've got these pieces, but hey, Google, we need these elements for you guys to come in because we haven't done either this part before or we need us to be credentialized from the customer that you're behind us or whatever it is. It's like, if you've listened well enough, then we can figure out, okay, what's the right team to field to win and win big.
Yeah. No, let's actually shift a little bit to culture and to, diversity and inclusion and how important that is. And the first time we met on that same day, we had a lot of time together. One of the things that you told me that you had, recently been doing at GE in this global role, you were describing this and other experiences that were kind of mind-blowing for me, and they were so eye-opening for me. You're talking about being at GE Digital as a woman and having a global role and going to all these other countries, some Middle Eastern countries and other places where you were literally the only woman in the room, operating in all these different cultural norms, and other stories how you were often the first and only woman in sales, in enterprise, because we know, enterprise software sales hasn't always been super inclusive, and no other person that in my 20 years of doing this has been more influential in the way that I think, and I think as a result, what is reflected now in SADA of how important this subject is, and I think as demonstrated by Wendy, and I don't know if Lucina is here, but yeah, she's our amazing board member. But and I see it at every part of how Google operates and who you invite to speak. Like in Atlanta, there was a gentleman from the Medici Group and talking about how inclusion and diversity, how it's really a strategic advantage and a competitive advantage. It's not just market norms. It's not just about those things. And as I look at the challenge ahead for the next 10 or 20 years, if we don't create an environment that is safe and inclusive and wonderful for people of all backgrounds, like we're literally not going to be able to fulfill the demand in the market, to appeal to all the customers we need to appeal to, and we won't be as creative and as agile and wonderful enough, frankly, to address the challenges ahead.
There are so many different reflections of diversity, and you can go back, maybe check it out, like in 25 years ago, I wrote a LinkedIn post about sort of what my experience has been about, we chat a little bit about sort of folks who are immigrants. Is like immigrants at work, that they have had a massive impact on my success overall. And again, it's like the diversity of thought. People who are different than you, it's harder at first to work with them. People are like you, it's like, because you get it. Hey, when I reference the restaurants, when I talk about, my Oakland neighborhood, they know what my neighborhood is like. It's easier. And it would be like, if there's anything any of us learn in life is easiest, the way you've gotten to success, no, it's doing the hard stuff. And I will tell you, if you will make the effort to reach across and figure out what does it take to create an environment that makes everyone feel included enough that actually they'll disagree with you, right? And raise the questions. It's like, that's how you're going to deliver great customer outcomes. And there's a lot about the way all of us show up every day, the way we run meetings, the way you open and say, like, has everyone had a chance to, my meetings are famous because I love funny things like, if you were going to be a superhero, what would you want to be? But it's like, there's a deliberate reason why I make sure everybody around that table says something, because the likelihood that they'll speak again is proven if they've said something in the first round. So there are all kinds of ways and things that we can all do.
Let's write that one down. I like that one.
There's all kinds of things that you can do to make that effort. But I'd be like, the effort it really is around innovation. So when I think about going to what we will talk about is like some of Google's core values. So one of them is think big. And that really is a lot of what drives to the innovation that we've got there. To be clear, there is zero innovation without diversity of thought. And diversity of thought is supported by people who grew up in different ways, who had different experiences than what you had. And if you aren't interacting and communicating in a way with people that is respectful, that makes space for them, you are not going to get those insights. And one of the great things about Google is Google is really focused on that. And it's actually, to be clear, it's the only place I've ever worked that they talked about that in front of customers. I've always been like, it's like you get to like the customer's always right. And the customer's always right, even if they're kind of being a jerk to someone around the table sometimes. And Google, that's like a no-fly zone. So, one of the things about sort of the way in which, like a common one that will come up at Google sometimes will be like females who are in technical jobs. They're showing up in front of a customer, and the customer will keep like defaulting back over to like, say it's like the sales guy, and they're having a technical question, and keep like heading back over that way. Like in Google, it's super ingrained in everyone in technology to be like, hey, no, actually, Victoria's the expert on that, and we'll reroute back over to, no, my friend, you're going to keep heading back over to Victoria because actually she's the one, right? And that someone else at the table who's the person they're leaning in on, really making clear, no, the person who can answer this is this person at the table, makes a massive difference. In a lot of places, they'll be like, the customer likes Tony better, so we'll just lean in on Tony and whisper in his ear and let him. No. That's not the way we roll. And I think that's really important. And there are things that all of us have an opportunity to do every day that, again, will absolutely impact the outcome that you've got.
Yeah,
from
that little gesture you're describing, it's so impactful because it's actually steering the customer in the right direction. That's the best outcome for them. Frankly, it's this person. Like, you want to do this thing right. You talk to this person. You're cluing in a little bit about how they're being maybe subconsciously biased in how they're speaking, but very respectfully, right? You're not embarrassing them or calling them out, but you're doing that. But you're also, you're showing a position of strength. You're like, look, all of us who came here in this meeting, we all came here for the reason. I'm the CEO, I'm here, I don't have all the answers, right? And I think if we do that at every level, again, it obviously is going to produce the best outcome, but it means a lot for that person, by the way. Engineer who's sitting there, that you as their superior or their peer is pointing back at them, like, they're not going to forget that because you're channeling their importance in a subtle and classy way, because it's the best for them and the best for the customer, and it's a little reminder as well.
Yeah, totally. Look, like everyone who shows up at your customers, they should have a purpose for being there, right? And if you aren't using their purpose, and by the way, you want a better way to like get more effective when they're like essentialism and like focus on doing a few things well, make sure you're not busy trying to do other people's jobs for them. Like, they're there, they've got a skill, they got something, they got a reason they're there. And so let them have their place and their role, right? Everyone who's around that table should have a reason why they're there. And you don't need to do that for them. You don't need to orchestrate it for them. Let them have their piece. It's one of the things, I'm an adrenaline junkie. And so one of my hobby is the flying trapeze. And for me, everyone's like, oh, what does that have to do with this? It's awesome, by the way. I highly recommend it. Santa Monica has actually a spot you can go. And if you were to step back and be like, what does that have to do with anything? One, I will just tell you, continuing to do something that you're not good at or failing at things is a really good sales lesson. Two, I would just be stepping back and saying, doing something that makes you afraid, like feeling fear is a muscle. And the more time you step up and you be like, okay, I know it's like my adrenaline's pumping. I know what this feels like. And I'm going to go out, I'm going to march out, and I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do anyway, is a muscle all of you guys should be exercising, and whatever that looks like for you, which is like, it's different things for different folks, but I'd be like, you need to do that. But it's also a great example of there's a ton of sort of not sexy roles in flying trapeze. Like there's someone who's like pulling the lines, right? You'd be like, but you really, really want that person when you are learning a new trick because they're going to save you from dying. And there are people like, there's the biscuit is the person who's like serving the bar, and they're the one who's going to drop the bar when you're going to return for your trick. Again, not super exciting, totally critical that they are doing their job at the right time so actually you don't get hit in the head with the bar and get hurt, right? And there's the catcher who's the one who's calling the time, and it's so much a sport where everyone's got to do their job. And I would be, that's really, really how I think about us being successful.
You did a team building thing in Santa Monica a long time ago, didn't you?
I've done one in Australia. I've done one in, But
Next
everyone who
offsite,
comes start to report to me, and they're
trapeze.
like, oh no, we're going to have to do trapeze, aren't we?
I like
I don't
that. Put
force
that on
anybody. We're inclusive. There's other options. You can learn to juggle. Or
do you mind if we open it up to a question?
Please. Sorry,
We haven't
I'll
gotten
stop
to
talking.
do this all morning. We have like only a couple minutes left, so make the
You should
answers.
give like a raffle award for someone who actually asked a question.
Yes, 2 minutes. All right, so who has a question for Carolee? You, sir. Oh, hi, Tigran.
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. Well, feel free to turn on LinkedIn. I actually expound at this at more length. But if I were to step back, one, I think all of us back over to hey, we're impacted for how we grew up. My mom taught English as a second language. I grew up around her teaching people who were from all over the world. And I will never forget her pointing out to me at different times as there were different crises in the world, we just tend to have different pools of types of immigrants that would be in her classes. But her talking at the time, so when the Czech Republic was behind the Iron Curtain, it was a family who had escaped. And I remember her, talking to me about this particular gentleman, and we were talking about that he was a janitor and he had been a doctor. And she was really pointing it out to me just to be back over to sort of how important, and be like, by the way, I know the names of everyone who cleans my building. I'm like, is the aspect of sort of one, paying attention to people and sort of not judging them by some other things of there's reasons why sometimes someone is in a certain position. But then I would just be fast forward. So I think there was a bunch about the way I was raised that said you need to look through the exterior into the interior of a person. But then I would just be, look, it's back over to diversity is great for business. I'd be I can directly go through the number of examples of times that immigrants have brought a different idea. There's something so powerful about, even when you think about someone who knows another language, and any of you guys who've ever really mastered another language, it's hey, they think about things in a different way. And when you realize someone was socialized in a different, they actually probe on questions. They've asked me harder questions. They pointed out things I wouldn't have thought about because I haven't encountered that before in my life. And I'll tell you what, you know who I want a team? I want on my team someone who's willing to bet on themselves. When you pick up and you go move somewhere else and you don't know the language and you don't have the network that a lot of us, had people who helped us along the way, gave us some ideas about where to go to college, I want someone who's betting on them. You know why? Because they are going to invest. And so love to be like it was something great about me. I can look empirically at the evidence of the way in which people from diverse backgrounds and immigrants in particular have impacted my performance, have impacted how and the outcomes of my businesses. So I'm like, it's not me, it's just smart business.
With that, I mean, of all the things that you're doing, I want to thank you for creating a more vibrant, more active, more pervasive channel strategy and organization within Google that we feel every single day. But even more importantly than that, again, thank you for being the biggest influence in my life with regards to this very important topic. It's really, I think, shows up at SADA and hopefully shows up even externally of SADA in the things that we do together and we do here within this organization to, I think, just get the message out there that this is the right way to do things, and the way we do things matters, and the language we use matters, and how we show up matters, and we hope to together really kind of change the culture of enterprise software and cloud in a way that becomes like the leading sector in all the industries that is the most diverse, the most inclusive, therefore the best performing of any other sector. And if we do that, I feel like that's a great contribution to the cause. And thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for listening to Cloud and Clear. Check the show notes for links to this week's topics. And don't forget to connect with us on Twitter @CloudandClear and our website, sada.com. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app.